Good morning. My name is Steve Varela, and I want to thank you for joining this session today. Before I dive into the research, let me briefly explain where I'm coming from because context matters. I spent 15 years as a corporate executive, managing international projects and joint ventures across 5 continents for firms like AT&T and Motorola. I've also spent the last 15 years as a college professor. That combination shapes everything about how I approach both curriculum design and research. It's fundamentally applied. Today, we're going to explore a question that sits at the intersection of 3 fields: adult learning theory, project-based curriculum design, and human-centered artificial intelligence. Specifically, we want to know which instructional practices are best positioned for hybrid AI plus human support and learning mastery. And critically, we need to answer that question empirically, not theoretically. So let's begin. Let's start with a fundamental challenge that Benjamin Bloom articulated back in 1984, what he called the 2 sigma problem. Bloom demonstrated that students who received one-to-one tutoring performed 2 full standard deviations above students in conventional instruction. Look at this visualization. The gray curve, that is your typical classroom, achievement clustering around the 50th percentile. The blue curve shifts to right when you add mastery learning structures. Now you're at the 84th percentile. But that green dashed curve at the top, that is the tutoring effect. Learners reaching the 98th percentile. So why aren't we there? Well, 2 reasons. First, traditional exams measure what business students and those in many professions can recall on a single day, not what they can actually do professionally. Secondly, and more critically, human faculty simply cannot replicate one-to-one tutoring at scale needed for today's educational landscape. That's the gap. And it is the gap that this research directly addresses. Because if AI can serve as a scalable feedback engine, we may have our answer to Bloom's 40-year-old challenge. Now let me give you the specific context of this study, because the population matters enormously here. We're looking at 67 adult professionals enrolled in an accelerated MBA program in Germany. These are not traditional college students. The median age is just over 40, with a mean of 20 years professional experience and a standard deviation of 9.3 years. They come from military, corporate, and governance sectors, and 98% hold at least a bachelor's degree, with 43.5% holding an advanced degree. The curriculum they were enrolled in was deliberately exam-free. It was built on a project-based learning module using what we call journey-style open educational resources. Step-by-step scaffolded materials delivered in 11-week accelerated terms, each carrying 6 credits. Students received continuous milestone feedback and had up to 2 resubmission opportunities for each project. I want to emphasize something. When executives with 2 decades of real-world experience tell you a pedagogical model works, that carries weight. Their professional credibility is precisely what makes these findings so important. Before presenting results, I want to be explicit about what this study was actually measuring, because this distinction is important for method clarity. We had 5 research questions. Are adults satisfied with an exam-free, project-based model? Do milestones and resubmissions, the mastery mechanisms, actually drive that satisfaction? Do structural factors like credit intensity and term pacing influence outcomes? Is the scaffolded, journey-style delivery preferred? And finally, what do the qualitative data tell us about the why? Here is the critical caveat. This study does not measure AI effectiveness. We are measuring something that has to come first: learner readiness and preference for the pedagogical structures that AI would need to support. You cannot build a useful AI feedback engine without first knowing whether students actually value and respond to iterative, milestone-driven feedback. That is what we're establishing here. A brief word on methodology and assessment, because rigor here is important and I want to address it up front. This was a mixed method study. On the quantitative side, we achieved a 100% response rate from the targeted cohort of 67 students. That is a clean, complete data set for this specific population. Now, because the survey used ordinal, binary, and nominal scales, consistent with Likert type instruments, I made the decision to employ strictly non-parametric statistics throughout. That means Wilcoxon sign rank tests, Mann-Whitney U comparisons, Spearman's rank correlations, and chi-square goodness of fit. I report medians and modes, never arithmetic means, consistent with the guidance of Siegel and Kessian, published in 1988. On the qualitative side, I inductively coded 112 open-ended responses to surface explanatory themes. This combination, rigorous non-parametric testing paired with inductive qualitative analysis, is the appropriate methodology for this type of program evaluation data. On the right hand of the screen, we look at assessing learner effectiveness. Standardization in project-based learning is structurally unstable. Faculty variance, cohort composition, and scheduling fluctuations make rigid methodological consistency difficult to reproduce across sections or institutions. Standardized testing misses the point of applied learning and feels like business administration, real-world competency, not test performance, defines success. Standardized instruments routinely fail to capture this practical dimension. Context variability is not a flaw to fix. It is a defining feature of problem-based learning. When educational contexts differ by design, any metric that demands uniform conditions will produce systemically invalid comparisons across those contexts. Self-reported satisfaction is a psychometry defensive alternative. When extrinsic measures are flawed or unavailable, intrinsic assessment becomes not a fallback, but a methodologically appropriate substitute grounded in empirical evidence, according to Judge, Sorensen, Bono, and Patton. Satisfaction correlates positively with task performance. Empirical research confirms that individual satisfaction functions as a reliable proxy for learning outcomes, making it both practical and theoretically sound measure for today's educational environments. Now let's get to the data, and these findings are quite interesting. Starting with overall program preference, 74.6% of the cohort rated this mastery model superior to their prior university experiences. The Wilcoxon sign rate test returned W equals 4.0, P less than 0.001, with an effect size of R equals 0.76. That is a large effect by any standard. On exam rejection, 89.6% preferred no exams, choosing the deliverable-based model instead. Chi-square equals 41.9, P less than 0.001, and Kramer's V of 0.79, near the ceiling of a very strong effect. Milestone value was essentially unanimous. 98.5% rated formative milestones as highly valuable, with a rank biserial correlation of 0.98 and a significant Spearman correlation of 0.26 at P equals 0.037. Perhaps most surprising for working professionals, 86.6% preferred the intensive 6-credit course load. Mann-Whitney U equals 110, P equals 0.003. This will become important when we look at the appendix. And 94% preferred the journey-style learning delivery. Chi-square of 51.9, Kramer's V of 0.88, one of the strongest preference effects in the entire study. This data is strong. These learners do not just tolerate high feedback intensive structures, these adults are likely demanding it. The prior numbers told us what happened. The qualitative themes tell us why. From 112 open-ended responses, we identified 6 inductive themes. The most frequent was resource availability. 50.8% of respondents described just-in-time material delivery as essential, preventing what one student called searching aimlessly. Closely related, 43.1% cited cognitive load management. The step-by-step structure reduced anxiety and allowed them to focus working memory on the problem itself. Structure and pacing emerged for 48.9% of respondents. Students explicitly stated the value of 6-credit immersive format for its momentum. One student wrote, "I never have periods where I have too many assignments." This directly validates our qualitative finding that P equals 0.003. Real-world relevance appeared in 44% of responses. Executives drew a direct contrast between school-style exams and professional iterative work culture. One respondent said, and I quote, "It's not grading based off memory, but provides a realistic approach to the private sector." Feedback and growth. 21.3% confirmed the mastery safety net directly. Actually, they confirmed the mastery safety net directly. Together, these 6 items don't just validate the qualitative results, they explain the mechanism driving them. At this point, I want to step back and connect the empirical findings to the foundational theory, because what we have essentially done is replicate the structural dynamics of Bloom's one-to-one tutoring model inside a scalable graduate curriculum. Bloom required iterative feedback. We provided formative milestones, validated by 98.5% of students at a Spearman correlation significant at P equals 0.042. Bloom required flexibility in time, allowing time to vary while holding mastery constant. We used an intensive 6-credit immersion format preferred by 86.6%. Bloom required the psychological safety to fail and recover. We implemented a resubmission policy endorsed by 97% of the cohort. The pedagogical theory works. The learners are ready. The only constant remaining is the one we cannot engineer around with human faculty alone. And that is exactly where we go next. Let me put a concrete number on the problem. Take a standard scenario for, say, 2 courses a term, 40 students, each completing 5 projects. That is 200 initial submissions, before we add any mastery scaffolding. Now, add an average of 2 formative milestone checkpoints per project. That generates 400 additional feedback events on top of the original submissions. Factor in a 70% resubmission rate, which is high, which our actual data supports, and you add 140 more detailed reviews. We are now at approximately 540 discrete personalized feedback cycles per term. At a conservative 30 minutes per review and a thorough, developmentally useful critique, these take longer than you are asking a faculty member to invest 270 hours beyond their standard teaching load, course preparation, advising, and institutional responsibilities. That is not a workload problem. That is a structural impossibility. Student demand is validated. Pedagogical efficiency is proven. The barrier we have here is human bandwidth, and that is precisely the gap that AI is positioned to fill. So where does this take us? Let me outline the research agenda going forward. This study successfully established what I would call the preconditions for AI integration. 98.5% of learners validate the asynchronous feedback loops, exactly what AI can deliver. 94% endorse structured, scaffolded delivery. 74.6% actively prefer iteration-based assessment. The learner readiness is demonstrated. The next phase requires repositioning how we think about AI in education. AI cannot be deployed simply as an answer machine or a content generator. It must function as a feedback corrective engine, one that assesses draft work, identifies gaps, provides formative guidance, and enables resubmission cycles at scale. The research agenda has 3 phases. Phase 1 requires a validation, directly comparing AI feedback, human feedback, and hybrid models on actual student performance outcomes. Phase 2 must address effective collaboration. We need to verify that AI-delivered feedback preserves the psychological safety that our human-led model clearly produced. And phase 3 requires longitudinal tracking to determine whether AI-assisted mastery learning translates into measurable long-term professional competency. That's the roadmap. Before I conclude, I want to be direct about the boundaries of this research because intellectual honesty strengthens, not weakens, our findings. On the sample, 67 participants from a single institution in a highly distinctive program format. This population almost certainly is self-selected. These are learners who choose this program, likely came predisposed towards iterative, feedback-driven learning. The average 20 years of professional experience also means that these findings should not be casually applied to traditional undergraduate populations, who may not yet possess the self-regulatory capacity that we observed here. On the design, this is a cross-sectional observational study relying on self-reported satisfaction. We did not run a randomized controlled trial. We measured associations, not causation. These are real constraints on generalizability, but they do not diminish the robustness of the findings for this particular population. Executive adult learners in a mastery-structured, project-based curriculum. Before we reach the final conclusions, I want to bring us back to the theoretical anchor of this work, because this table tells us the whole story in 3 rows. Every structural element Bloom said was essential for 2 sigma learning gains, iterative feedback, time flexibility, and the psychological safety to fail and recover, we implemented in this curriculum. And for each one, the learners validated it empirically, with effect sizes that are difficult to dispute. The pedagogy works. What comes next is an engineering challenge, not a pedagogical one. Let me close with 4 conclusions. First, learner readiness is validated. A 74.6% overall preference rate, significant at p less than 0.001, demonstrates that adult learners do not merely tolerate master learning, they actually prefer it. Second, professional rigor is being redefined. 89.6% of these executives viewed iterative, deliverable-based assessment as more rigorous than traditional exams. That is a fundamental paradigm shift in how we need to think about academic accountability. Third, scalability remains at the central challenge area. The feedback corrective loop works. The students embrace it, but no human force can deliver it at scale. Fourth, and this is the key takeaway, students are already expressing demand for the precise capabilities that AI is designed to provide: immediate feedback, infinite patience, and iterative style support. Bloom identified the 2 Sigma challenge 42 years ago. We now have the pedagogical model. We have learner readiness. The question before us and before our institutions is whether we are able to close that gap. Thank you generally for your time and engagement for this work today. I realize I've gone a little bit over. I want to leave this as an open conversation, not a closed presentation. Full survey instrument, the complete data set, and the AI-assisted thematic analysis context, approximately 3,300 words used for pattern recognition, are all available on the CG Scholar platform. I encourage you to engage with the data directly. A dedicated interactive research website is in development and will be announced through the same platform. My contact information is on this slide. I welcome your questions, your critiques, and your collaboration. The most interesting work is still ahead of us. For those who care to continue, this appendix maps the complete predictor pathway for Hypothesis 1, overall program satisfaction. You can see 6 independent predictors on the left, 3 qualitative mediating themes in the center, and the H1 outcome on the right. I want to draw your attention to the notation, strongest predictor associated with the 6 credit course load. U equals 110, P equals 0.003, effect size R equals 0.36. This is why this stands out. While several other variables showed stronger endorsement rates, the 6-credit load is the only predictor in this study that crosses the medium effect threshold, R greater than or equal to 0.3, in a direct between-group association with the overall satisfaction outcome. Students who preferred the intensive format reported meaningfully higher program satisfaction than those who did not. This suggests that the immersive course structure functions as the enabling condition, the architectural frame within which milestones, resubmissions, and scaffolding all produce their effects. It is worth noting for any institution considering mastery-oriented learning design. This final appendix maps the theoretical pathway for hypothesis 2, exam rejection. What I want you to see here is that exam rejection in this sample is not about avoiding difficulty. It is about professional epistemology. 4 theoretical traditions converge on this finding. Andragogy theory, which tells us adult learners need task relevance. Cognitive load theory, which distinguishes germane from extraneous cognitive load. Mastery orientation, which separates growth-focused from performance-focused learners. And professional authenticity, the deliverable culture that executive professionals already inhabit. The Kramer's V of 0.79 is a large effect by any standard, and a sub-hypothesis test confirms it. Students who rejected the exams held significantly higher overall satisfaction scores. Median of 4.0 versus 3.0 for the exam preferring students. P equals 0.02. This is not a preference quirk. It's a structural signal that traditional assessment is misaligned with expert adult learners.